Greetings, friends. Crew member of our beloved, polluted, and unique spacecraft, which, since the last time we met, has taken another turn about its imaginary axis, and of course continues creating events in full development. And, as you know, when I'm not standing up with the map of Earth behind us, it is because we have a guest. And our guest today, I don't want to say that it's a very important guest. Vladimir Adrianza, international analyst, and many other academic degrees on his name, who's also a member of the Institute of Defense, IADEN, and in this roads of the armed forces, we've met plenty of times. Not everyone wearing a uniform is in service, and not everyone in active service wears a uniform, but we all work for the same cause of validity. Welcome. Thanks, Walter, for inviting me to a wonderful show, and we will speak about whatever topic you deem important. I don't want to start by saying a topic, but what do you think is an important topic for today? Well, the petro as part of the national geostrategy and geopolitics developed by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to defend ourselves from the aggression of states. This is to have a background and to understand the background behind the things, the interesting and smart moves from the petro today. So this is like going against the dollar from our point of view. To understand what's happening, we need to take a look at history. What did the United States do before World War II ended in 1944? In Bretton Woods. So they just put together a group of countries that were under certain regions of India and England that were associated to the American policy, and they did this in the conference. And there were two main figures. One of them was Harry White, the economist who represented the United States, and the other one is Professor John Maynard Keynes, who was representing the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was the great power, the great leader. So it was the incoming power against the old power. So the sterling pound against the old dollar. So the fact of having dollars is due to the great discussion that was held between these two characters. And Harry White said that the currency in the afterwars should have been the dollar, and John Maynard Keynes thought that it should have been Bancor, which is the currency he proposes to relate the rights they have today. And this is to carry out international transactions with the emerging economy for the international economic order. So there's a very interesting discussion here because John Maynard Keynes wants to work with this, but the Empire of England cannot hold this because they did not have enough gold stored at that moment due to all the events that took place during the war. But the United States did have this. So Harry White insists that dollar should be the reserve currency for international exchange in the economic order, and Keynes said that it cannot be a fiduciary currency, it must have a currency. And then we have the gold standard. Fiduciary means without support. It's an act of faith. Fiduciary is because I believe that this is worth so much, but there's not a support from the market. So when we see the fact that Keynes is pressuring. Then there's the gold standard, $35 per ounce, as you've said many times in your show. So the United States, as an emerging power, as higher white as a proxy of this power, used the dollar, but with the support requested by Keynes for the currency to have the support of gold. So the ounce was $35, and it's freely converted until 1971. So what's the importance of the currency from the point of view on what expansion of the States after war is? Currencies are fundamental because with this currency, United States become exporters of 50% of the merchandise exported from a country around the world, and international transactions, 100% of international transactions, have a basis on the American dollar with the gold standard. And the United States leave World War II with a surplus of their heavy industry, willing to export whatever they were not going to use during the war. One of the things the United States did at that moment was, by using the theories of Keynes of the participation of the defenders of the free business became statisticians due to the requirements of the time. And from this point, they strengthened their industrial system that first manufactured washing machines and cars, to then manufacture cannons and wars, and after the war, they manufactured weapons and also appliances and cars. And with the American dollar, they covered all the countries in the world under the orbit of the United States. And then it's how the Cold War started, the bipolar world, and all this that lasted until 1991 was when the Union fell. Now, back to the economic area. This strategy of having a strong currency led to the Marshall Plan that grants $10 billion to Europe at that time. For those of the younger generation, Marshall Plan was a humanist plan of rebuilding Europe for it to have power and to buy the products that we still needed to export, because it was easier to export weaponry that was destroyed and needed to be rebuilt. And now, in a state of peace, they needed to sell vehicles, appliances, TVs, and never losing the strength that the industry had during the war. So the point of all this was having the dollar as the single international currency that also had a reserve supported by gold. It was terrible for the British because the sterling pound was no longer used. And there's a historic breakthrough at this moment when the United States stopped using the gold standard with Richard Nixon due to three elements. Because they reached the maximum stage of expansion of the after-war capitalism after World War II. Second, they reached non-conventional oil rates, and then they broke with everything related to the backup of a currency, the gold standard, in order to expand currencies and also expand the economy of the Western countries in the after-war, starting in 1971. So these 3 points that took place here, of course, led to the devaluation of the dollar because it was a supported currency and it became a fiduciary currency after this, and there were problems with the rest of the nations where all European currencies had reduced its parity, and Charles de Gaulle and the English minister, whose name I've forgotten, requested the States to give them gold instead of notes. And the United States is not willing to give them gold, and they said that having international reserves in gold and exchanging them in the international market, doing so with the gold of England and France at that moment. So All this happened under this framework, and de Gaulle was hurt in his pride in World War II because he was no longer important. And when he became president of France, then he had his days paid because the pride of France was hit, and he had ideas behind the army. He was an statistician, and he was willing to do things. All this, even though after that there were new currencies as the yen, that the IMF acknowledges as an international currency, and then the euro. The euro is an effort, as William Clark says, the most important effort ever done by a group of nations to have an alternative to the dollar until some years ago, and then yuan, that just some years ago became one of the currencies acknowledged by the IMF. Even though the sterling pound and other currencies are still in circulation. And these are the currencies that show the relationship of an economy against their behavior worldwide. This strategy means that the United States have a dollar as a currency that allows them to bring their geoeconomic interests worldwide, to import raw materials and then export literally everything. And in 1971, there's a phenomenon that's well known. The fact that before derogating the gold standard, Richard Nixon sent Henry Kissinger to speak to the Saudi Arabian leaders for them to keep negotiations of oil internationally based on the American dollar, because if not, it wouldn't have any support. And when he was asked about this, what if we don't do it, he said, well, you'll have to face the consequences. So this is support of the dollar after 1971 as the first international currency. And this currency became a very important element. And if you read Keynes' theory, you will see that in chapter 21 of his book, he speaks about the importance of currency in the framework of expansion for global demand. And this is the core of his theory. This means how, for them or the United States, a currency is a mechanism to keep their empire around the world. They start with their own currency, a currency that they control, and they can overthrow governments, as they did with Saddam Hussein. They did the same thing with Muammar al-Gaddafi, and Hussein wanted to sell oil in euros after breaking the agreements with the United States, and al-Gaddafi, who wanted a different currency for all African countries, and that's why the reaction took place with the European countries. Gaddafi had been trained in the best academies of Europe, but he was a nationalist. I had the chance to meet them both, and I interviewed them in an interview with Saddam Hussein, and I sat next to Gaddafi in his palace. I sat in the carpet, and I had the Quesada next to me, who was a very important diplomat, and the life standard of Iraq and Libya were really excellent. It was like our standard in Venezuela when the dollar was at 4.30. No one was against their government. How were they overthrown? It's a sinister act. Yes, of course. It is a sinister act that's part of the expansion of the West to annul many international stakeholders to be able to have control over the whole planet. And back to this, there is, of course, a direct relationship, and Keynes thinks about this, between the currency and the rest of the economy. So they start with a view where they control currency internationally, or every nation or power exercises their economy based on the strengthening a given currency. And this action is the one that, in very difficult conditions, is attempted by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela with the petro. Let me explain what's the relationship between this. As we know, Venezuela is the country with the greatest oil reserves in the world for heavy and extra heavy oil. It's a reserve that also has other minerals, vanadium and others as part of the reserves, with great conditions of natural gas. Venezuela is the fourth or fifth reserve of natural gas worldwide, and additionally we have 17 out of the 19 strategic minerals in the area of Guayana. So a nation with characteristics as this justifies what Commander Chavez said, that a country, he said, the Orinoco Strip must have armed forces that are capable of defending the interest of a country with so many minerals. So this all leads to the fact that ever since 2015, even though we can speak about this since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution, facing different attacks, it will take all the program to analyze one by one. But in 2015, there were three main factors. Three main factors to come into consideration. First, Obama's decree of March 19, 2015, where he says that Venezuela is an extraordinary threat for the foreign policies of the United States. Then, August 24, 2017, when Donald Trump created a blockade, a financial blockade over Venezuela, from the perspective of the institutions that are managed or that work with the dollar worldwide. For instance, the World Bank, the IMF, and others. So all the sphere of the dollar. And recently, on March 19 of this year, there was another decree that blocks individuals and companies of the United States to make business with Venezuela based on the framework of the use of the petrol that Venezuela is just launching. So what is the idea behind the petrol? Well, to demolish the blockade that Venezuela has from the United States. They're not things as they were with George Bush, where they were behind all the events, the coup of April, the oil, and the destabilization, and all relating to this. But now openly, and something that Donald Trump does ever since the Obama decree. So it's opening all this artillery against Venezuela to make Venezuela a failed state. And for them, a failed state was created to do with the rest of the people who are going around the world requesting sanctions for Venezuela. The so-called Venezuelans, not properly, however, is to create a puppet government that will allow them to subordinate the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by stating that they have gotten rid of the state-nation with the interest of Washington. Even though at this time it's been set up the table that one of the doctrines that Washington has never kept aside is the Monroe Doctrine. And this should be called the Adam Doctrine, in my opinion. But the Monroe Doctrine, America for the Americans, for the elite of the United States. They forget that we are all Americans, from Canada to the Patagonia. And yes, so they are from the United States. We are Americans because we share a continent. Remember that Donald Trump's campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again." Make America great again. So they call the United States America. I have many anecdotes about the times that I visited the United States. Well, some of them have led to the exchange of things that we cannot mention at this time, and we have all been through this. Very American. We're all American, from Canada to Patagonia, and even the Falklands, if I may. A lady once told me, I'm American. I said, I'm American too. But I come from South America. And this woman, after I showed her the map of the continents, one behind you, she said, really? And I said, yes, really. Well, the Americans don't know geography. Yes, that's one of the problems. But coming back to our topic, with all these attacks carried out by President Trump and before him President Obama, the United States are trying to transform Venezuela into a failed state with the idea of appropriating all our natural resources and also attacking the Bolivarian doctrine that for 200 years has been against the Monroe Doctrine. And this leads us to the petro. The creation of the petro is very interesting because it allows us to overcome this blockade, because when you analyze Trump's decree, this is meant for American citizens and individuals as well as companies. Why? Well, because they cannot have a decree beyond their territory, because it would be ridiculous. But in the case of the petro, as it's a cryptocurrency, they don't have control over the transactions that can be made with a cryptocurrency, with any cryptocurrency in the world, from Bitcoin to Ethereum and all the other cryptocurrencies we can speak about. And this is created based on a decree where the objective is the petro, but it is difficult to carry this out, and the use of petro has two very smart points. First, avoiding the financial blockade of the United States, and they've done this increasingly since 2015, and then creating a currency, an international currency, a crypto asset, where any person, any individual or business that wants to buy any products for export of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela can do so based on this cryptocurrency, and Venezuela can also buy in different parts of the world products that are needed because we are not producing them here today, and this is how we should stay. Venezuela must evolve to a diversified productive economy and not only work with oil, even though we have lots of oil. We also have all the minerals and necessary elements for this, as well as the human talent that has been developed with thousands and thousands of scholarships. It is also important to point out, Walter, your remark is very necessary, because we must understand that this is a comparative advantage and also a competitive advantage of Venezuela against the rest of the world, because if we industrialize these minerals, these raw materials, then we'll have a capacity for export that will benefit everyone in Venezuela and will allow us to achieve the third objective of the nation plan, Plan de la Patria, which is creating of Venezuela and economic power. And this is crucial with the first objective framework, which is national independence, sustaining, keeping. Do you think about Colombia plan? Well, the case with Colombia plan, or Plan Colombia, was meant to strike the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, because as Colombia is a country with all the characteristics of a failed state for so much time, and also the main producer of drugs worldwide, thus a strategic ally of the most important consumer in the world. And if you break it, then millions of people will become crazy. And there are many details that come from this, because today the currency in the market of drugs is the American dollar. The factor that oil had, the dollar is the main currency for transactions related to drugs, as it has been seen in different international reports, amongst them reports of the United Nations that I have seen, the so-called narco dollar, or the dollar for drugs. So in Venezuela, we are creating a self-standing currency, a mechanism to relate to the countries abroad. And this is born in a crucial moment, a moment when the People's Republic of China has launched the golden yuan. And the golden yuan is only for future oil transactions, as China is the greatest import of oil today. If we see the countries based on their imports, first China and then the United States. But this is going to change some years from now, because the decline of the United States will come soon. We will see this very clearly in the next decade. When do you think this will happen? 2019, 2020, the decline will start. So they will look for oil elsewhere. So the mechanism that makes them feel stronger because they have a given production of oil that has reduced their exports will decline in the future. And this is very well related to the coups against Venezuela, because we have the greatest oil reserves in the world of heavy and extra heavy oil, but we also have light oil and medium oil, and we are just 4 days away, while the Persian Gulf is 45 days away sailing, so it's 10 to 1. And when we contrast to Canada, the contamination created from the exploitation of Alberta, Canada, and the pipelines in the United States is far superior than the one that can be created in Venezuela with the exports that we've had for a century. And this new system of fracking in order to find oil between the rocks. And this is part of the evidence that we have. The fracking pollutes water, and 1% of the fracking mechanisms are radioactive components, and they don't only poison water, but they poison the soil and can have an effect against agriculture. And then after that, we have mutations and alteration of chromosomes due to radiation levels that we never thought of. Radiation in the water, in the air, and in the food. So all of this brings us to believe that this aggression against Venezuela has been due to reasons that I've said. And this is a very important action from Venezuela to be able, and once again, I would like to speak about Keynes. In his theory, he states, in chapter 21 of his book, he said that many economists are always thinking that prices are related to supply and demand. However, few economists that have studied beyond this understand that the framework of a currency is necessary for the creation of prices and the control of markets. And this element is the one that underlies within the actions taken by President Nicolás Maduro Moro today in the Venezuelan state, trying to create a currency that would allow a relationship between Venezuela and the rest of the world from the perspective of imports and exports without having to use the American dollar. And we must say something about the American dollar. The American dollar, with the exchanges of China and Russia, and with all the events that are taking place today internationally, is a declining currency. The fact that Congressman Ron Paul of the United States said last year that the health of economy was based on the health of its currency, and that the Federal Reserve since 2008 aid to now had issued $3 trillion that did not have any support. So they did not have any support. And the economy of the United States was the one, according to Richard Nixon, was going to support the American dollar. And if the economy of the United States is the one with the greatest debt in the world, and they are over-issuing their currency, which is counterproductive, managing the merchandise, the use of currency as a merchandise for exchange, they should, of course, have control over this, but they don't. And this is where the decline of the American currency starts against the world. Today, it has been shown in Venezuela. The opposition has spoken about the dollarization of the economy, and without a doubt, this would be a very important setback from any point of view, because it will grant the United States, we would be granting the United States our sovereignty, our currency, our monetary sovereignty, and would also be subject to the IMF for any credit actions that Venezuela could develop in the framework of our economic growth. So this is counterproductive, and this is because I understand if this happened 6 decades ago. We were a nation emerging from World War II. It was the only one that wasn't bombed in its continental territory. It developed a great power, but not an economy that has been struck, where the president of the United States believes that they need to make America great again. So make America what it used to be, because it is no longer what it is. This slogan means that we are no longer what we were, and we are attempting to be what we once were. You were subtle when you said that it wasn't bombed in their territory, regardless of the bombings from the Japanese. They were only bombed in Pearl Harbor, but the strategists of the Navy of the United States said, listen, the Japanese can reach Pearl Harbor, and once they attacked Pearl Harbor and they were crying about treason, well, the aircraft carriers weren't in the port at that moment, so they couldn't attack. Well, they knew about the passwords in Japanese. They allowed the Japanese to strike first, and they wanted to react against this attack and treason. This was something that has been stated as possible by the strategists. And then, after war, they imposed their currency internationally. So what should Venezuela do right now? We're going to speak about the technical elements of this. Venezuela is now facing a very big fight and plan Freedom 2 that has been developed by the United States, by the South Command of the United States, against Venezuela, and the 3 decrees, the one from Obama and the 2 from Donald Trump. The idea is to asphyxiate Venezuela, create a blockade on our country, to overthrow Nicolás Maduro, and to derogate the constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Of course, after this, imposing the dollar in Venezuela, dollarizing the economy, and asking Venezuela to be subordinated to Washington. And for this, there's a strategic need for them to have control over America, and particularly on Venezuela, so that they can breathe after the growth of the People's Republic of China, a growth that's non-stoppable from the point of view of their growth right now. And even from the military point of view, after the mistakes to be subtle that the United States have made in the Middle East, where they attempting to once again apply the blockade operation that they set during the Cold War, they haven't been able to do so against Russia. Russia, as an emerging power, after the Cold War ended, and at the same time, Russia has demonstrated in the last 2 or 3 years, and Vladimir Putin said, we're going to have 2 or 3 bad years, but after that, we're going to grow. And this, of course, has happened. And this led to the re-election of Putin, and you can see that in the electorate and credibility. And this is very different to the old positions of other leaders. So, Walter, the decision on the petro, well, first, let us understand what the petro is. It's a crypto asset and a cryptocurrency. But just so people can understand what a currency is, and to be academic, as you are always asking us to be, we need to say the following. Currencies have 3 main functions. First, it is a means for exchange. Karl Marx said that it was a merchandise for exchange. So a universal merchandise by which you are able to exchange different type of assets and measure this exchange with the different possibilities of the third merchandise, that in this case is, of course, a currency. Then it's a deposit of value, and here there's a very important detail. Whenever you save, and there's an international nation with savings where you have assets to strengthen your international exchange, you do this based on a currency and based on a group of mechanisms that are strengthening the value of said currency. And one of the things that have hurt with dollar today and dollar cucura, and one of the things that have been created from Colombia to Venezuela to strike the capacity of Bolívar Fuerte, that has different implications, we will speak about them, is indeed going against the Venezuelan currency due to their deposited value. So no one in Venezuela can save their money in bolívares, because inflation will not allow money to be important, and they're trying to create a scarcity as the one that we have seen in recent times with the help of international factors. So this deposit of value is denied to our current currency. However, petro does have this characteristic because it will have the support of oil, gold, diamonds, strategic and rare metals, biodiversity as well. So it has a foundation, and having a foundation makes it different to the rest of international currencies. I have to say something. When I was young in Uruguay, we used to play with notes. They weren't mine. A friend of mine, his parents had some pharmacies, some drugstores, and we would be playing with these educational board games. Now they're teaching you how to make business. And we used to play with notes of 10,000 marks. And well, that was inflation that broke Germany. 10,000 marks. Imagine that today, when I was in Germany with the armed forces and the army, well, with that money I could have bought a tank. There's a very interesting case in Germany in the past year where the wives of the workers of a factory went to the factories at noon to receive the payment, because if they would wait for the afternoon, they would not be able to afford the food that they needed for that day. But that's a different story that would be important to speak a different day as a lecture about all these elements. But back to the case of our currency. Something else that has hit Venezuela with this operation against us is that one of the properties that Venezuela should have is being an account unit. An account unit is a possibility for you to measure the GDP. The GDP and the gross territory product. everything that measures the economy of a nation, the goods and services produced in a nation, in and outside the territory during a year. In Dossier, we have the honor of being watched by all the different categories of people, from ages and from social strata. I love this because I want all our people to listen to us and go even beyond the borders. So the unit of account I can understand what's the balance of a company in a year based on an account unit, but with the inflation today, having a unit of account of any national company, whether public, private, small or big, it is indeed difficult. And today we have a means for exchange for small transactions of food and other things in national currency, while the rest of the deposited value and the unit of account are done with currencies that are not related to the country and are not good for the country. And the Bolivar in Venezuela does not only represent our national constitutional currency, as defined by Article 318 of the Bolivarian Constitution, but this also means all the protection with the name of the liberator, and it reflects the Venezuelan nationality. And going against the Bolivar means going against Venezuela, and of course being against the memory of the liberator for the Venezuelans. And this has been part of the operation that has taken place in the country. So, in order to recover Bolivar, one of the elements that are being used, including many others, is the creation of a cryptocurrency, which can't be reached by the United States to strike against it. Second, this means a technology, one of the emerging and most reliable technologies that allow us to work with different sectors of the world without having to use the dollar. Going back to the dollar would be the worst that could happen to Venezuela. First, because it's a money, the type of currency that's in decline and will lose our monetary sovereignty that we require. You said that it is declining. You were speaking about, well, about the American dollar. We all know about the fluctuations of the dollar in different index, NASDAQ, and other standards. And this shows the weakness of the dollar internationally. For this year, China and Russia are exchanging their products without the use of the American dollar. And this is, of course, very harsh. Of course it is. And there are agreements with other nations, for instance, in the case of Turkey and Russia, where they're using the Turkish and the Russian currency. And well, Turkey is part of NATO, isn't it? Well, you're always speaking about this, and this is what is today on the board. I have said this ad nauseum, and when I was there, things were very different, and something is changing there, without a doubt. The loss of power of the United States, not only from their global influence, but also with the influence of their institutions based on the dollar, that led to the destruction of nations to ensure their own means, is not reaching an end, but it is facing a stage of decline. And we see no suggestions that it will be strengthened. We see that this currency will weaken in the next years. And Russia and China are working together, and this is, of course, very tough on the United States. And China, with their production capacity that they have today, which the United States don't have, and that's the reason why the United States wants to take control over Latin America in order to have the raw materials that in the future would allow them to sustain their internal demand and, of course, exchange with the rest of their allied nations. This is the background of this. Let me say something. Decades ago, the Association of Chinese Students said that they wanted to invite me, but we want to invite you to our country, but please pay for your own ticket. And I said, of course. The rate of exchange was 4:30, and I remember the Avenue of Heavenly Peace, the biggest avenue in the world, and in front of this, the Forbidden City, which I was allowed to enter. And I remember that at an exact moment in the morning, and I proved this day to day, there was basically a wave, a tsunami of bicycles heading that way. And at 5 p.m., another tsunami of bicycles coming back. And I visited some of the bigger companies and even some of the smaller companies. And you saw the citizens thinking about fate and future. They just had 15 or 20 minutes to rest, a bowl of rice, eating at the workplace, and working to continue with progress of the country. And they haven't brought a Chinese person to the moon yet. Well, the space station, as you can see in my office, I have a model of the next space station. It was given to me years ago. It's similar to this, but even better. I had the chance of take a look at it in your office. But back to the Petro. It is important to understand that the Venezuelan economy, if it wants to expand, if we want to translate this comparative advantage we have with the different minerals that we have in Venezuela in order to have a productive economy that produces enough food, enough medicine, housing, footwear, clothing, everything that Venezuelans need, with the capacity of exporting in the future, not raw materials, but finished products, added value in different parts. Well, we need to have a currency that is strong, and this currency, we speak about the cryptocurrency Petro, goes this way. The other thing that we must take into consideration is that this cryptocurrency, together with the measures that will be made from July 4th, which is reconverting the currency, so a new set of measures behind this, then the Petro is a necessary part to strengthen these actions, and these actions based on our currency will allow us to little by little get back the capacity, as President Nicolas Maduro said, the sovereign Bolivar, and the strategy of the Petro, which will not only become a crypto asset, but a cryptocurrency so that Venezuela can exchange with different nations in the world. A currency will, of course, be part of the board, as today the golden yuan is, which is growing in the Shanghai stock for negotiations of oil, and the Russians that have developed their own currency for their exports of oil and other products too, and who will also release their own national cryptocurrency. I don't know if it will be supported or not, but they're about to get this. The idea of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has been contagious, yes. And Max Kaiser, and I have comments from Max Kaiser, who is one of the most enthusiastic person for the Petro. And he said, the Petro cryptocurrency can solve the problems of Venezuela until creating the foundation for a great recovery if it is taught and managed appropriately. This is one of the things said by Max Kaiser. And let me see if I can find the other quote, because it's important to keep this in consideration. Listen, one of the things that he's saying, if the Petro cryptocurrency works in Venezuela, the United States will not be able to apply sanctions on any other nations, as they have done for so long, with nations that don't respond to their imperialist interests. These are statements that are important, that are crucial. So Venezuela, listen, we haven't spoken about all the elements related to the technical area, to security, and everything beyond that, because it's a very extensive topic. We've seen a geoeconomic and geostrategic approach of what petrol means, and a defense of the petrol from the perspective and national sovereignty of our financial assets of our country against the many resources we have as a country in order to transform this into development, because our idea is not to live off these minerals as we did with oil in the 20th century, but turn this into competitive and comparative advantage that would allow us to develop an industry that first satisfies the internal market and then creates capacity for exports with added value abroad, and to avoid the dependencies that we've had. There's an important detail with the comments of Max Keister. He said the problems of Venezuela are caused mainly because of the American empire. This is old news, of course, but the idea of the petro is the start of breaking this colonial empire, and it is said by an academic as him, evading sanctions is breaking this colonial change, and creating the first sovereign currency is easy, according to him. Venezuela can become part of the fight in order to weaken the dollar. So there's an international struggle to get rid of the dollar for international transactions. If Venezuela, at this moment, understands that they're going to dollarize their economy, they would basically be doing a harakiri. This is a Japanese expression. They lost World War II against them, but now they are with them. And regardless of that, they have created relationships with Russia and even China. So they have somehow divided from the influence of the American sphere. So we are led to think that due to strategic reasons, the petro must be fostered, and in the future create a recovery process for the bolivar as a national currency. There are other mechanisms that we could speak about in a different occasion. In TV, time is your enemy. Here, we need to work with time and space, and this has been a clear message. What's your idea to wrap up? We need to continue with the petro strategy, and in the future, we need to recover Bolivar as the national currency. And this is the project of the president. This is one of his objectives. It's one of the things that we have written about in different stages nationally, because this is a need. Where can we read your statements? I have a blog called 180 Degrees ICQ, 180 grados y ZQ. That's one, and the rest ICQ. And the other is with my public participations. I thank the invitations of the media, wonderful media as the one that I am today, and showing this idea, speaking about these events that have developed through time. This is the objective. We must do so in order to develop our national economy, to have autonomy for our currency, and to foster the petro and gather back the value of the bolivar in order to ensure the sovereignty of Venezuela. And of course, be against the traitors that come from Santander. There's a topic that we could speak in a different occasion. We should have a single show for that, because we need to analyze everything that means to Venezuela the strike that the drug state we have next to us within the operations with the national currency. Well, this is a commitment for the near future then, and whatever you may be on the other side of the screen. Thank you, Professor Vladimir Adrianza, Professor, Doctor, many others. After that, you'll be called Vladimir. Well, I hope so. I want to be called by my name, Vladimir. That's my name. I was named like this by my father. I'm proud of it. My name is Walter Nilsson, according to what my parents gave them. So in the Falklands, I was on the Argentine side. And regardless of this, I was invited by the British Crown. But your heart isn't there. No. I will not tell you where my heart is, but it is in Venezuela, however. Thank you for allowing us to be there with you. And we'll be back with the next dossier. And as you see, this is always important. So, from Studio 3 of Venezuela Television, don't send any messages to Telesur. This program doesn't belong to Telesur. It comes from myself, and it's broadcasted from Venezuela Television, the pioneering channel. Director, the floor is all yours.